The floor trembled first, then the lights above the great hall flickered, and every guard around me reached for their weapons at the same moment. I did not understand yet that within the next 10 minutes, everyone sworn to protect me would be gone. My name is Thalira Voshkan, heir to the Vosh Empire, and I was standing in the middle of my own coronation feast when the alarms began to scream. The hall had been full of light and music only a breath before. Nobles in silver robes bowed as I passed. Musicians played the old victory songs. My 12 personal guards, chosen from the oldest bloodlines in the empire, stood in a perfect ring around my throne, their ceremonial spears crossed behind them like a wall of silver. Then the doors at the far end of the hall burst open, and soldiers who did not belong to my empire poured in like water through a broken dam. I remember the sound most. Not screaming, not yet, just the sound of hundreds of boots hitting marble at once, and the deep mechanical hum of weapons charging. "Rebellion," someone shouted. "The Southern Fleet has turned." My guards moved fast. For one heartbeat, I believed they were forming up to defend me, the way they had sworn to do since the day I was born. Then I saw the truth in their eyes. They were not preparing to fight, they were preparing to run. The captain of my guard, a tall man named Vorin Kale, looked at me only once. His face held no anger, no fear even, just a cold kind of calculation, like a merchant deciding a trade was no longer worth the price. "The old laws release us when the throne cannot be defended," he said, and then he turned and walked toward a side door, and 11 more guards followed him without a single word of protest. I stood there in my ceremonial robes, feeling the weight of a crown that suddenly meant nothing, watching the people who had sworn blood oaths to protect me disappear through doorways meant for servants. I had always been told that loyalty in my empire was carved into law, sealed with ceremony, and passed down through bloodlines older than most stars. I had believed that a guard's oath was something unbreakable, something sacred. In that moment, I learned that oaths written into law can be undone by the same law the instant they become inconvenient. The nobles scattered next. Silver robes turned into fleeing shapes, pushing past each other toward exits, dropping jeweled cups and ceremonial daggers on the marble floor. Somewhere behind me, a table of food collapsed as someone shoved past it. The music had long since stopped. Only alarms and shouting filled the space where songs used to be. I did not run. I do not know why. Perhaps it was pride, or perhaps I simply did not believe, even then, that my empire could fall apart so completely in the space of a few minutes. I stood beside my throne, empty hall stretching out before me, rebel soldiers advancing through the smoke, pouring from a shattered ceiling vent. That is when I noticed him. At the far edge of the hall, near a pillar carved with the crest of my grandmother's reign, stood a single figure in a simple gray uniform. Not silver, not ceremonial, practical. He was human, one of the small number of soldiers from Earth who served in my empire's lower ranks, mostly ignored, mostly considered beneath the dignity of real service. I remembered his name only because he had been assigned to stand near my chambers for the past several months as part of a minor peacekeeping detachment, a formality more than anything else. Corporal Dane Ashford. I had spoken to him perhaps twice, and only to give orders. While every guard sworn to me fled, Dane Ashford stepped forward instead of back. He moved toward me, not away, weapon already raised, scanning the smoke-filled hall with the kind of focus I had never seen from any of my own soldiers, not even in training exercises. "Your Highness," he said, voice steady despite the chaos around us, "we need to move, now." I stared at him, still too stunned by what I had just witnessed to fully process his words. "My guards," I said, "they left, all of them." I saw. His jaw tightened, just slightly. "I'm still here." There was no time to question why. The rebel soldiers had reached the far end of the hall, their weapons sweeping the room, searching for me among the overturned tables and abandoned chairs. Dane grabbed my arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to pull me from my frozen state, and guided me behind the ruins of a banquet table. "Down," he said, and I obeyed without thinking, crouching low as energy bolts cracked through the air above us, striking the throne where I had been standing only seconds before. The ornate chair I had waited my entire life to sit upon shattered into burning fragments. I looked at the corporal beside me, this soldier from a species my empire considered barely worth conscripting, a species most of my nobles referred to with quiet contempt behind polite smiles. He had not hesitated. He had not calculated the cost of staying. He had simply moved toward the danger instead of away from it. "Why are you still here?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. "You owe me nothing. Your service contract does not require this." Dane glanced at me, and for a brief moment, something almost like amusement crossed his face, though his eyes never stopped scanning our surroundings. "Contracts aren't really the point," he said. "Let's talk about it later. Right now, I need you to trust me and stay low." I had commanded armies on paper. I had studied strategy since childhood. I had never once, in all my years of preparation to rule an empire, been so completely uncertain of what to do next. Smoke thickened around us, curling through the broken ceiling vents and drifting across the marble floor like fog rolling over dark water. Rebel voices called out orders somewhere close, searching room by room. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it might give away our position. Dane pressed his back against the overturned table, weapon steady in his hands, eyes fixed on the gap where enemy soldiers might appear. "There's a service corridor behind the east pillar," he whispered. "Leads down toward the lower levels. If we can reach it before they circle around, we have a chance." "A chance," I repeated. The word felt strange coming from someone so calm in the middle of chaos. "You speak as though this is a normal mission." "It's not," he admitted. "But panicking won't get you out of this hall alive. Moving will." I found myself nodding, though every instinct told me to remain frozen, to wait for guards who were never coming back, to cling to the assumption that someone, somewhere, would restore order, because that was simply how my world had always worked. But my world had already changed the moment Vorin Kale turned his back on me. We moved together, low and quiet, weaving between overturned furniture and shattered decorations that had once celebrated my ascension to power. Every few seconds, Dane would pause, listen, then guide us forward again, always positioning himself slightly ahead, slightly between me and the direction of greatest danger. I noticed, even in the middle of my own terror, how different this felt from being surrounded by my ceremonial guards. They had always walked beside me, behind me, performing loyalty like a dance rehearsed 1,000 times. Dane moved like someone who had actually thought about what protecting another person required, not what it looked like from the outside. We reached the pillar he had mentioned, and sure enough, a narrow service door sat half-hidden behind a tapestry depicting my ancestors' first conquest of this system. Dane pulled the tapestry aside, revealing a passage barely wide enough for two people to walk through side by side. "After you," he said, then paused. "Actually, let me go first, just in case." I almost argued. An empress does not walk behind a soldier, especially not one from a species my empire had spent generations quietly diminishing. But looking back through the smoke at the ruins of my coronation hall, listening to the shouts of rebel soldiers growing louder, I understood that titles meant very little when survival was the only thing left to decide. "Go," I said. He slipped through the doorway first, weapon raised, checking the darkness beyond, before waving me forward. I followed him into the narrow passage, the tapestry falling closed behind us, muffling the chaos of the hall we left behind. The corridor beyond was dim, lit only by small strips of emergency lighting along the floor. Pipes ran along the ceiling, carrying whatever systems kept the palace functioning, systems I had never once thought about during my life of banquets and ceremonies. Dane moved forward carefully, checking each junction before allowing us to continue. "How did you know this passage existed?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I studied the palace layout when I was assigned here, he said. Figured it was smart to know more than one way in and out of every building I guard. None of the other soldiers did that. Maybe they should have. We walked in silence for a while after that. The only sounds our footsteps against metal flooring and the distant echo of chaos still unfolding somewhere above us. I found myself studying him from behind, this soldier who had chosen to stay when 11 of my sworn protectors had not. "Corporal Ashford," I said eventually. "Dane is fine, Your Highness. Formal titles don't really matter right now." "Then you may call me Thalira," I said, surprising myself with the offer. No one outside my closest family had ever used my given name without formal address attached. "Dane, tell me honestly, do you believe we will survive this?" He paused at a junction, checking both directions before answering. "Honestly, I think our odds are better than they were standing in that hall. That's about as much as I can promise right now." It was not the reassurance I wanted, but somehow it felt more real than any promise my own guards had ever given me. Vorin Kale had sworn to protect me with beautiful words carved into ceremonial oaths passed down through centuries. Dane Ashford offered no such poetry, only honesty and steady hands. We continued deeper into the passage, the sounds of rebellion growing fainter behind us, though I knew this was far from over. Somewhere above, soldiers were searching every room of my palace, and eventually they would realize the throne room held no Empress, only broken furniture and a shattered chair. I did not yet know how far this night would carry us, or how much I would learn about loyalty, courage, and the true measure of a soldier's worth. I only knew that when every guard sworn to protect me by blood and law had vanished into the smoke, one man who owed me nothing had chosen to stay. And somehow, that single choice felt like the first true moment of my reign. The passage eventually opened into a wider maintenance corridor, and Dane finally lowered his weapon slightly, though his eyes never fully stopped moving across the shadows. "We should be clear for a moment," he said. "This section isn't on the main patrol routes. Whoever planned this attack probably doesn't know the palace as well as they think." I leaned against the cold metal wall, allowing myself a single breath of relief before the questions I had been holding back finally came pouring out. "Why did you stay, Dane? Truly. I need to understand." He considered the question seriously, the way a person considers something they have thought about before but never had to explain out loud. "Where I come from," he said, "a promise means something. When I took this post, I made an oath to protect the people I was assigned to protect. Doesn't matter if the situation gets difficult, doesn't matter if everyone else runs. A promise isn't conditional on convenience." "But my own guards were bound by law," I said. "Blood oaths passed down through generations, and still they left." "Laws can be written with escape clauses," Dane said quietly. "A real promise doesn't work that way. It either means something or it doesn't." I studied him in the dim emergency lighting, trying to understand this strange, simple logic that somehow felt more solid than every ceremonial tradition my empire had built over centuries. "Your species is considered lesser among my people," I admitted, the words feeling harsh even as I spoke them, though I intended no cruelty by it, only honesty. "Many of my nobles believe humans lack the discipline for true honor." Dane's expression did not change much, though something flickered behind his eyes. "I've heard that plenty of times," he said. "Doesn't change what I believe is right." "I am sorry," I said, and I meant it, perhaps for the first time understanding how deeply unfair that judgment had always been. I did not expect loyalty like this from anyone tonight, least of all from someone my empire has spent so long dismissing. "Let's survive the night first," Dane said, though his tone had softened slightly. "You can apologize to my whole species later if you want." Despite everything, I found myself almost smiling, a strange reaction given our circumstances, but something about his steady humor made the terror feel slightly more bearable. We moved onward, following the maintenance corridor toward what Dane believed was an exit near the lower gardens, a section of the palace grounds rarely used except by staff tending the ornamental plants my grandmother had once loved. As we walked, I found myself asking more questions, partly out of genuine curiosity, and partly because conversation helped keep my mind from spiraling into panic. "Tell me about your homeworld," I said. "I have read reports, but I suspect they were written by people who never bothered to understand your people at all." Dane's shoulders relaxed slightly as he spoke, though he kept his pace steady and his senses alert. "Earth is complicated," he said. "We've fought each other more than any species probably should, but somewhere along the way, we also learned that keeping your word matters more than almost anything else. Soldiers who abandon their people don't get remembered kindly back home. Doesn't matter how powerful the enemy was. And soldiers who stay, they get remembered," he said simply, "even if things don't turn out well." I thought of Vorin Kale, walking away without a single word of apology, his ceremonial oath dissolving the moment danger became real. I thought of 11 other guards following him, without hesitation, choosing self-preservation over centuries of tradition, and I thought of this single human soldier, someone my empire had never fully respected, choosing to stand in a burning hall because a promise, to him, meant something unbreakable. "I think," I said slowly, "that my empire has confused the appearance of loyalty with the substance of it for a very long time." Dane glanced at me, something like quiet approval in his expression. "That's a dangerous thing to realize in the middle of a coup," he said, "but probably an important one." We reached a junction where the corridor split in two directions, one leading upward toward what I recognized as storage areas beneath the eastern wing, the other continuing downward toward depths of the palace I had never personally explored. Dane paused, studying both paths carefully. "The garden exit should be up this way," he said, gesturing toward the upward path. "But that puts us closer to where the rebellion forces likely have people stationed, especially if they're trying to secure the grounds." "And the other path?" "Leads deeper into the lower levels, older parts of the palace, from what I could tell during my initial survey, riskier in terms of unknown territory, but probably less likely to have enemy soldiers waiting." I considered both options, feeling the weight of decision-making settle onto my shoulders in a way it never had during ceremonial ruling. Every choice I had made as heir apparent had been symbolic, performative, decided by advisors and tradition long before I ever spoke a word. This decision was mine alone, with real consequences waiting on either path. "The lower levels," I said finally. "Unknown danger feels safer than certain danger tonight." Dane nodded, seemingly satisfied with my reasoning. "Good instinct," he said, and we turned down the descending corridor together. The air grew cooler as we descended, the corridor narrowing slightly as it wound deeper beneath the palace foundations. Old support beams, clearly predating the current structure by centuries, lined the walls, remnants of whatever building had stood here before my family's rise to power. I found myself wondering how much history lay buried beneath the marble halls where I had spent my entire life, hidden away and forgotten the same way my empire had apparently forgotten what true loyalty required. "Careful here," Dane said, pointing toward a section of flooring that looked slightly warped, likely weakened by age or moisture. I stepped around it carefully, grateful for his attentiveness to details I would have completely missed on my own. As we continued, I noticed something odd about Dane's movements, a rhythm to how he checked corners, how he positioned his body between me and open spaces, how he seemed to calculate threats several steps ahead of where we currently stood. This was not simply training. This felt like something practiced through actual experience. "You have done this before," I said, "protected someone through danger like this." His expression tightened slightly, and for a moment I feared I had touched something painful. "Once," he said, "a long time ago, back on Earth, before I ever left for service among the stars." "What happened?" He was quiet for several steps before answering. I was part of a unit assigned to protect civilians during an evacuation. Things went wrong. Our transport got separated from the main group, and it came down to a few of us holding a position long enough for everyone else to get clear. "Did you succeed?" "Mostly," he said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested the story held more complexity than a simple answer could capture. "We got most people out. Lost one soldier who insisted on staying behind to cover our retreat. Sergeant named Callum Reyes. Older guy, been in the service longer than anyone else in our unit. He told us evacuation mattered more than his own survival, and he meant it." I listened carefully, understanding now why Dane's actions in the throne room had felt so instinctive rather than calculated. This was not new philosophy for him. This was a lesson learned through loss. "I imagine that changed how you view duty," I said quietly. "It did," Dane admitted. "Made me realize that promises aren't just words people say during ceremonies. There's something you either live up to or you don't, especially when it costs you something real." We walked in silence for a while after that, the weight of his story settling between us, like something sacred, not to be disturbed with unnecessary conversation. I found myself looking at this human soldier with entirely new eyes, understanding that his loyalty tonight was not born from blind obedience or hope for reward, but from a deeply personal code shaped by loss and memory. Eventually, the corridor opened into a small chamber, clearly some kind of old storage room long abandoned by palace staff. Dust-covered broken crates stacked against the walls, and faded markings on the floor suggested this space had once served some administrative purpose generations ago. Dane moved through the room carefully, checking for any signs of recent activity before allowing himself to relax slightly. "We should rest here for a few minutes," he said. "Catch our breath before continuing. No sense running ourselves into exhaustion when we don't know how much further we need to travel." I settled onto an overturned crate, finally allowing the exhaustion of the past hour to catch up with me. My hands trembled slightly, adrenaline slowly draining from my system, leaving behind the raw reality of everything that had happened. My guards had abandoned me. My coronation had been destroyed. My empire, the one I had spent my entire life preparing to inherit, was currently being torn apart by forces I did not yet fully understand. "Dane," I said quietly, "what happens if we cannot stop this rebellion? What happens to everyone who trusted in my rule?" He sat across from me, weapon resting against his leg, but never far from reach. "One step at a time," he said. "Right now, the priority is keeping you alive and finding out who we can actually trust among whatever forces remain loyal to your throne. Bigger questions come after that." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," he admitted, "but overcomplicating things right now won't help either of us survive the night." I appreciated his honesty more than I could properly express. Every advisor I had ever known spoke in careful diplomatic language designed to soften difficult truths, to avoid direct answers that might reveal weakness or uncertainty. Dane spoke plainly, without pretense, treating me as someone capable of hearing reality rather than someone requiring protection from it. "Thank you," I said, "for staying, for all of this." He nodded once, simply, as though the gratitude, while appreciated, was not something he required to justify his choice. "Let's get you somewhere safe first," he said. "Thank me properly once we're actually out of danger." Before I could respond, a distant sound echoed through the corridor behind us. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with the deliberate pace of a search patrol rather than random wandering. Dane rose immediately, weapon raised, positioning himself between me and the doorway. "They found this section," he whispered. "We need to move, now." My heart pounded as I rose from the crate, following Dane toward a second doorway on the far side of the storage room, one leading further into the unknown depths of the palace foundations. Whatever safety we had found in this brief pause was already slipping away, replaced once again by the immediate need to survive. "Stay close," Dane said, glancing back at me with an expression that held both urgency and reassurance. Whatever happens next, I need you to trust my instructions completely. Can you do that? I looked at this soldier, this human my empire had underestimated for so long, standing ready to face whatever danger approached, without a single trace of hesitation, despite everything he had already risked tonight. Yes, I said, and meant it completely. I trust you. The footsteps grew louder behind us as we slipped through the second doorway, leaving the storage room behind, uncertain of what waited ahead, but certain, at least, that we would face it together. The new corridor twisted downward at a sharper angle, forcing us to move carefully along uneven stone steps that had clearly not been maintained in generations. Behind us, the footsteps continued their steady advance, unhurried, confident, the sound of soldiers who believed their prey had nowhere left to run. "They know this section leads somewhere," Dane muttered, keeping his voice low. "Which means they probably have people waiting ahead of us too. Then what do? We keep moving until we don't have a choice. Then we make the best of whatever choice remains." His calm confidence, even now, gave me something to hold on to amid the rising fear, threatening to overwhelm my thoughts. We descended further, the air growing damp and cool, until the corridor finally opened into a wide chamber that made both of us stop in surprise. It was some kind of old cistern, clearly built long before my family ever ruled this world, with massive stone pillars rising toward a ceiling, lost in darkness above. Shallow water covered portions of the floor, reflecting the faint emergency lighting still functioning somewhere in this ancient section of the palace. "This must connect to the original water systems," I said quietly, remembering old historical texts describing infrastructure long since replaced by modern technology. Before my grandmother's reign, before the current palace was even built on top of the old foundations. Good news is, ancient water systems usually connect to multiple exit points, Dane said, scanning the chamber for any visible pathway forward. Bad news is, we don't know which direction leads out. Before we could decide, the footsteps behind us grew suddenly louder, and 3 rebel soldiers emerged from the corridor we had just left, weapons already raised, clearly having tracked our path with more skill than Dane had anticipated. "There," one of them shouted, and immediately opened fire. Dane moved faster than I believed possible, shoving me sideways behind one of the massive stone pillars, just as energy bolts cracked against the ancient stonework, sending fragments scattering across the shallow water. He returned fire in controlled bursts, forcing the rebel soldiers to scatter for their own cover rather than advancing directly. "Stay down," he said, voice tight with focus. "Whatever happens, stay behind this pillar." I pressed myself against the cold stone, heart hammering as the exchange of weapons fire echoed through the cistern chamber, each shot amplified by the enclosed space, until the sound felt like physical pressure against my ears. I had never witnessed real combat before, only ceremonial demonstrations designed to showcase strength rather than actual danger. This was entirely different, raw and unpredictable, every second stretching with unbearable tension. Dane moved from cover to cover with practiced efficiency, drawing the rebel soldiers' attention away from my position while methodically closing the distance between himself and their formation. I watched, both terrified and strangely fascinated, as he used the pillars and shallow water to his advantage, moving in ways that seemed to anticipate exactly where his enemies would aim before they even fired. One rebel soldier attempted to flank around a nearby pillar, clearly hoping to catch Dane from an unexpected angle. Dane seemed to sense the movement before it fully happened, pivoting just enough to intercept the attempt, disarming the soldier with a swift, controlled motion before the man could even process what had occurred. The weapon splashed into the shallow water, and Dane secured the soldier's shoulder with enough force to render him unable to continue the fight, though I noticed Dane took care not to cause any lasting harm beyond what was necessary to neutralize the threat. "Two left," Dane called out, still moving, still calculating his next steps even as he spoke. The remaining 2 rebel soldiers, clearly unnerved by how quickly their companion had been handled, adjusted their strategy, splitting apart to approach from different directions. I realized with rising dread that this forced Dane to divide his attention, making his position significantly more dangerous. "Dane," I called out, unable to stop myself. "Behind you." He spun immediately, catching sight of the second soldier attempting to close distance from his blind side. Rather than retreating, Dane charged forward, closing the gap himself before the soldier could properly aim, using the element of surprise to disrupt the man's balance and force the confrontation onto terms Dane could control. I watched in a mixture of horror and awe as Dane subdued the second soldier through a series of quick, efficient movements, never using more force than the situation required, always focused on ending the confrontation as swiftly as possible rather than prolonging unnecessary conflict. The third soldier, seeing both companions defeated within moments, hesitated, clearly recalculating whether continuing this fight remained worthwhile. Dane straightened, weapon steady, facing the last remaining threat directly. "This doesn't need to continue," Dane said, his voice carrying clearly across the chamber. "Lower your weapon, and we can end this without anyone getting seriously hurt." For a long moment, the soldier remained frozen, clearly weighing his options. Then, without warning, he turned and fled back through the corridor we had originally entered from, apparently deciding that reporting our location was preferable to continuing a fight he now recognized as unwinnable. Dane exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon slightly, though his eyes remained alert for any further movement. "That complicates things," he said. "He'll report our position now." I emerged from behind the pillar, still trembling slightly from the intensity of what I had just witnessed. "How did you do that?" I asked. "3 soldiers, and you handled them without truly harming any of them." "Training," Dane said simply, though I sensed there was more depth to his skill than a single word could capture. "And plenty of practice, learning how to end fights quickly, rather than dragging them out. My own soldiers rely almost entirely on ceremonial combat forms," I admitted. "Beautiful to watch during demonstrations, but I wonder now how practical they truly are in situations like this." "Ceremony and survival don't always overlap," Dane said, moving to check on the 2 soldiers he had disarmed, ensuring they remained stable despite their inability to continue fighting. "Looks like these 2 will recover fine. We should move before reinforcements arrive." We continued deeper into the cistern chamber, searching for any pathway that might lead toward safety. Dane examined the walls carefully, running his hand along sections of stone until he found what appeared to be an old maintenance ladder built into one corner, leading upward into darkness. "This might connect to the surface somewhere within the palace grounds," he said. "Worth trying, given our limited options." As we approached the ladder, I found myself studying Dane more closely, noticing details I had somehow overlooked during our earlier conversations. A faint scar along his jawline, likely from some previous confrontation. The steady, controlled way he breathed, even after intense physical exertion. The quiet confidence that seemed to come not from arrogance, but from genuine competence, earned through experience, rather than inherited privilege. "May I ask you something else?" I said, as he began testing the ladder's stability. "Go ahead." "Why did you choose to serve in my empire specifically? Humans are given very limited opportunities within our military structure. Surely there were better postings available to someone with your evident skill." Dane paused, considering the question honestly rather than offering a rehearsed answer. "Truthfully, I took this assignment because the pay helped support my younger sister back on Earth," he said. "She's studying to become a doctor, and military service postings among the stars pay significantly more than similar positions back home. So your service here was purely practical." "Started that way," he admitted. "But somewhere along the line, I started actually caring about doing the job right, regardless of how my own service was viewed by the people I protected. Doesn't matter if someone respects you, only matters if you can look at yourself honestly afterward." I considered his words carefully, recognizing a philosophy entirely foreign to everything I had been raised to believe about duty and honor. My entire life, I had been taught that respect and loyalty flowed naturally from proper bloodlines, from ceremonial oaths, from positions earned through careful political maneuvering. Dane represented something else entirely, loyalty earned through consistent action rather than inherited status. I believe, I said slowly, that my empire has much to learn from people like you. Dane offered a small, tired smile. Let's survive tonight first, he said. Philosophy lessons can wait. He began climbing the ladder, testing each rung carefully before trusting his full weight, and I followed close behind, grateful for his steady presence, even as uncertainty about what awaited us above continued to gnaw at my thoughts. The climb felt endless, the darkness above seeming to stretch further than any reasonable structure should allow. Occasionally, Dane would pause, listening carefully for any sounds indicating danger waiting above, before continuing our ascent. My arms ached from the unfamiliar physical exertion, my formal robes proving entirely unsuited for climbing through ancient maintenance shafts, but I pushed through the discomfort, driven by the simple need to survive this night. Eventually, Dane reached what appeared to be a sealed hatch, testing its edges carefully before attempting to force it open. After several tense moments of effort, the hatch gave way with a groan of protesting metal, revealing a narrow gap leading into what looked like an abandoned section of the palace's eastern gardens, overgrown and neglected for years. "We're near the surface," Dane said, relief evident in his voice, despite his continued vigilance. "Let's move carefully, no telling who might still be searching these grounds." We emerged into cool night air, the overgrown garden providing decent cover among tall grass and neglected hedges that had clearly once been meticulously maintained before falling into disrepair. Stars scattered across the sky above, indifferent to the chaos unfolding within my empire's capital, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to simply breathe, grateful to have survived this far. "We need somewhere to properly regroup," Dane said, scanning our surroundings. "Somewhere we can figure out who among your loyalists might still be trustworthy and what resources we can access to fight back properly." "There is a safe house," I said, remembering details from security briefings I had received but never expected to actually need. Established generations ago, known only to the immediate royal family and highest-ranking security officials. If my location was compromised through betrayal, it might be our best option. "Lead the way then," Dane said, "but carefully. We can't assume anyone outside this conversation can be trusted right now." As we moved through the overgrown garden, careful to avoid open areas where we might be spotted, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened since the rebellion first erupted within my coronation hall. 11 guards, sworn through generations of ceremonial tradition, had abandoned me the moment danger became real. One human soldier, owing me nothing beyond a simple service contract, had chosen to stay, fight, and protect me through danger that should have terrified any reasonable person into fleeing. The contrast taught me something I suspected would remain with me far longer than tonight's crisis, something about the difference between loyalty performed for ceremony and loyalty demonstrated through action when everything was truly at stake. We continued through the darkness together, uncertain of what remained of my empire, uncertain of who among my supposed allies could still be trusted, but certain, at least, that whatever came next, I would not face it alone. The safe house sat beneath an unremarkable storage building on the outskirts of the palace grounds, disguised so thoroughly that even I, who had known of its existence since childhood, struggled to locate the correct entrance among rows of identical maintenance sheds. Dane remained close beside me throughout the search, alert to any sign of movement in the darkness surrounding us. "There," I finally said, recognizing a small marking carved into the doorframe of the third shed we approached, a symbol known only to members of my family and the most trusted palace officials. I pressed my palm against a hidden panel, and after a moment of quiet mechanical processing, the floor beneath the shed's interior shifted, revealing a hidden staircase descending into darkness. Dane insisted on entering first, weapon ready, checking the space below before allowing me to follow. The safe house itself was small but functional, containing basic supplies, a secure communication terminal, and enough space for perhaps a handful of people to remain hidden for an extended period if necessary. "This should buy us some time," Dane said, finally allowing himself to relax slightly as he confirmed the space was empty and secure. "Let's see what information we can gather about who's actually behind this uprising." I moved toward the communication terminal, my hands still slightly unsteady as I activated the system using security credentials I had memorized but never expected to actually use. The screen flickered to life, displaying encrypted channels reserved for emergency situations exactly like this one. "I need to determine who among my council remains loyal," I said, scanning through available channels, "and who might have been involved in orchestrating tonight's betrayal." Dane stood behind me, watching the screen carefully. Any names come to mind immediately? Someone with motive, someone with access to disable palace security at exactly the right moment. I considered the question seriously, running through the faces of every advisor, every council member, every noble who had stood close enough to potentially arrange such a devastating attack. Then, slowly, a realization began forming that made my stomach tighten with dread. "Advisor Corin Vashel," I said quietly, "my grandmother's most trusted advisor, retained through my own ascension as a gesture of continuity and respect for the old order. What makes you suspect him specifically?" "He was the only council member absent from tonight's ceremony," I said, the memory now feeling significant in ways it had not seemed during the celebration itself. He claimed illness, requested to be excused. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now I wonder if his absence was deliberately planned. Dane's expression grew serious. "Motive? Corin has long believed the Empire requires stronger, more traditional leadership than what I represent," I admitted, the words feeling heavier as I spoke them aloud. "He has openly criticized what he calls my grandmother's soft policies toward outer territories, policies I intended to continue and even expand. So removing you would allow him to install someone more aligned with his own views." "Precisely," I said. "And as my grandmother's oldest advisor, he retains connections throughout the security apparatus that could easily explain how palace defenses were compromised so thoroughly and so quickly." Dane studied the terminal screen, his expression thoughtful. "We need confirmation before acting on suspicion alone," he said. "Is there any way to verify his involvement through these systems?" I began searching through available security logs, cross-referencing access codes used to disable various palace defense systems throughout the evening. It took considerable effort, navigating through encrypted layers designed to prevent exactly this kind of investigation, but eventually a pattern began to emerge. "Here," I said, pointing toward a series of authorization codes flagged in the logs. "These codes belong to Corin's personal security clearance, used to deactivate 3 separate defense systems within minutes of the rebellion beginning." Dane leaned closer, examining the data carefully. "That's fairly definitive," he said, "though I imagine convincing others of his guilt will require more than just these logs, especially if he retains significant political support." "There is more," I said, continuing to search through available records. "A communication log, encrypted, but the metadata shows repeated contact with military commanders stationed in the Southern Fleet, the same fleet that initiated tonight's uprising according to the initial alarms." The pieces fell together with sickening clarity. Corin Vashel had spent months, perhaps years, carefully arranging this betrayal, using his position of trust to slowly compromise the very systems meant to protect my family's rule. And tonight, while I stood surrounded by guards who fled at the first sign of danger, he had likely been coordinating the final stages of his plan from somewhere safe, waiting for news of my capture or death. "This explains why my guards abandoned their posts so readily," I said slowly, understanding now settling into a deeper, more painful place within my thoughts. If Corin had already compromised key figures within the security apparatus, perhaps some of my own guards were never truly loyal to begin with, merely waiting for an opportunity to align with what they believed would become the Empire's new leadership. Betrayal breeds more betrayal, Dane said quietly. Once people see loyalty as conditional, plenty of others start calculating their own odds rather than standing firm. I thought of Vorin Kale's cold, calculating expression as he abandoned me, his words about old laws releasing guards from their oath, feeling less like genuine legal interpretation and more like convenient justification for choices already made in advance. Perhaps he had known about Corin's plans. Perhaps his flight had been coordinated rather than simply cowardly. I trusted so many people who apparently never deserved that trust, I said, my voice carrying more bitterness than I intended. Dane placed a steady hand on my shoulder, an unexpected gesture of comfort that somehow felt entirely appropriate given everything we had endured together. You trusted people because your empire taught you that titles and bloodlines guaranteed loyalty, he said. Tonight taught you that real loyalty comes from character, not ceremony. That's a hard lesson, but an important one. I looked at him, this soldier who had demonstrated exactly the kind of character he now described, someone who had proven through action rather than words that promises made honestly carry weight, far beyond any ceremonial oath sworn under formal circumstances. How do we stop him? I asked. Corin has clearly planned this for a long time. He likely anticipates that I might survive tonight and attempt to expose his involvement. Dane considered the question carefully. We need allies, he said. People within your remaining forces who haven't been compromised, and evidence solid enough to convince them of the truth. Do you know anyone you can trust completely, someone with enough authority to help rally loyal forces against this uprising? I thought carefully, running through names of military commanders, palace officials, and noble families who had shown consistent loyalty throughout my grandmother's reign and my own brief time as heir apparent. Eventually, one name emerged that felt genuinely trustworthy rather than merely convenient. General Priya Ashgrove, I said, commander of the Northern Defense Fleet, stationed far enough from the capital that she likely remains unaware of tonight's events. She served under my grandmother for decades and has never shown any indication of political ambition beyond faithful service. Can we reach her through this terminal? Possibly, I said, already working through the encrypted communication channels reserved for emergency contact with fleet commanders. Though establishing contact will alert anyone monitoring these systems that I remain alive and actively resisting. That's a risk we need to accept, Dane said. Staying hidden indefinitely isn't a viable long-term strategy, especially if Corin consolidates control while we remain passive. I nodded, understanding the necessity despite my apprehension, and began composing an emergency transmission to General Ashgrove, detailing everything we had discovered about Corin's involvement and requesting immediate support in reclaiming control of the capital. While the message transmitted through secure channels, Dane moved toward the small supply cache within the safe house, checking available resources with the same methodical attention he had shown throughout the night. We have some basic medical supplies, emergency rations, and what looks like a backup communication device, he reported. Should help if this terminal gets compromised somehow. You think of everything, I said, genuinely impressed by his continued vigilance, despite the exhaustion clearly affecting both of us after the night's events. Comes with the job, Dane said simply. Speaking of which, once this transmission goes through, we should assume Corin's people will eventually locate this safe house. We can't remain here indefinitely. Where do you suggest we go? Somewhere public enough that a direct assault would draw unwanted attention, but secure enough that we can coordinate with any loyal forces General Ashgrove might send, Dane said. Do you know of any broadcast facilities within reach that could allow you to address your empire directly, expose Corin's betrayal publicly? I considered his suggestion carefully, recognizing the strategic value immediately. The Central Communication Tower, I said, located within the government district, heavily fortified originally to prevent exactly this kind of infiltration, though I suspect Corin may have already compromised its security given tonight's events. Risky, but potentially our best option for actually turning public opinion and remaining military forces against him, Dane said, especially if we can broadcast solid evidence of his betrayal before he manages to consolidate a false narrative. Before I could respond, the terminal chimed softly, indicating an incoming transmission. My heart raced as I activated the response, hoping desperately that General Ashgrove had received our message and remained loyal despite tonight's chaos. The screen flickered to life, revealing the general's weathered face, clearly having been woken from rest, judging by her disheveled appearance, though her expression carried immediate alertness once she recognized who was contacting her. "Your Highness," she said, relief evident in her voice. "We received reports of unrest within the capital, but no confirmation of your status. I feared the worst. I survived, General, though only through the actions of a single loyal soldier while my ceremonial guards abandoned their posts," I said, glancing briefly at Dane before continuing. "I have evidence that Advisor Corin Vashel orchestrated tonight's uprising, coordinating with elements of the Southern Fleet to seize control of the Empire." General Ashgrove's expression hardened immediately. "That aligns with troubling reports I've received regarding unusual fleet movements over recent weeks," she said. "I always harbored suspicions about Corin's growing influence within military circles, though I lacked concrete evidence to act upon those concerns." "I need your support, General," I said. "Loyal forces to help reclaim the capital and expose this betrayal publicly before Corin manages to solidify false control." "You have it, Your Highness," General Ashgrove said without hesitation. "I can mobilize a strike force within hours, though reaching the capital will require careful coordination to avoid detection by whatever forces Corin currently controls." "Thank you, General," I said, genuine relief flooding through me for the first time since tonight's crisis began. "We will attempt to reach the central communication tower to broadcast evidence of Corin's betrayal directly to remaining loyal citizens and military personnel." "Understood. I will coordinate our approach to align with your timeline," the general said. "Stay safe, Your Highness. The Empire still needs you." As the transmission ended, I turned to Dane, feeling something between hope and continued anxiety settling into my thoughts. "We have allies," I said. "Now we simply need to survive long enough to reach the tower and expose Corin before he can complete his plans." "Simply," Dane repeated with a small, tired smile. "Nothing about tonight has been simple so far." "No," I admitted, "but perhaps that is exactly why your presence has mattered so much. Simple, ceremonial loyalty failed me tonight. Something more complicated, more genuine, proved far more valuable." Dane nodded, checking his weapon one final time before turning toward the hidden staircase leading back toward the surface. "Let's go prove that point properly then," he said. "Your empire deserves to see exactly what real loyalty looks like." We ascended together, prepared to face whatever remained of this long, dangerous night, carrying with us evidence capable of exposing betrayal at the highest levels of my empire, and a partnership forged through actions that spoke louder than any ceremonial oath ever could. The government district lay several kilometers from our hidden safehouse, and Dane insisted we travel along back streets and maintenance paths rather than risk the main thoroughfares where Corin's forces likely maintained checkpoints. Dawn had not yet broken, though the sky had begun shifting toward the deep blue that precedes sunrise, and I found myself acutely aware of how little time remained before the capital fully woke to whatever new reality Corin intended to establish. "Stay close," Dane said, as we moved through a narrow alley running parallel to one of the capital's main boulevards. "We're getting closer to areas likely to have active patrols." I nodded, my formal robes now stained and torn from hours of climbing through maintenance shafts and crawling through overgrown gardens, a stark contrast to the pristine appearance I had maintained only hours earlier during my coronation ceremony. Somehow, the physical toll felt appropriate, a visible reminder that tonight had stripped away every illusion I once held about my empire's foundations. We paused at the alley's end, observing the boulevard beyond, where several armed soldiers patrolled in a pattern that suggested organized control rather than random deployment. Dane studied their movements carefully, calculating timing and positioning with the same methodical focus he had shown throughout the night. "Their rotation gives us a window," he said quietly. "About 30 seconds, where the boulevard remains clear enough to cross without being spotted directly. And after that? We move fast, find cover on the opposite side, then continue toward the tower, using whatever cover the surrounding buildings provide." I trusted his judgment completely at this point, understanding that his experience with exactly this kind of dangerous navigation far exceeded anything I had learned through ceremonial training. When the patrol's rotation created the gap he predicted, we moved swiftly across the boulevard, reaching the shadows of a government building on the opposite side just as the soldiers began their return pattern. "Good," Dane whispered, checking our surroundings once more. "Tower should be visible from here." Sure enough, rising above the surrounding buildings, the central communication tower stood illuminated against the pre-dawn sky, its distinctive spiral architecture instantly recognizable even from this distance. Reaching it would require navigating several more blocks of potentially patrolled territory, but we had come too far to hesitate now. We continued forward, moving from cover to cover with increasing caution as we drew closer to the tower's base, where security would undoubtedly be significantly more concentrated given its strategic importance. Eventually, we reached a position within direct sight of the tower's main entrance, and what we observed there confirmed our worst suspicions. Rebel soldiers, wearing the distinctive insignia of the Southern Fleet, stood guard at every visible entrance, clearly having secured the facility completely. Any hope of simply walking through the front entrance evaporated immediately. "There has to be another way in," I said, studying the tower's structure for any alternative access points. "Service entrance, likely on the opposite side," Dane said. "Communication towers typically require regular maintenance access separate from the main public entrance." We circled carefully around the building's perimeter, staying within whatever shadows and cover remained available, until we located exactly what Dane had predicted, a smaller service entrance positioned along the tower's rear section, guarded by only 2 soldiers rather than the concentrated force protecting the main entrance. "2 guards," Dane said quietly. "Manageable, but we need to move quickly and quietly to avoid alerting anyone inside." "Can you handle both without causing serious harm?" I asked, remembering his earlier restraint during our confrontation in the cistern chamber. "I can try," he said, "though I need you to stay hidden until I signal it's clear." I nodded, pressing myself into the shadows of a nearby structure while Dane moved forward with practiced stealth, approaching the 2 guards from an angle that kept him hidden until the last possible moment. What followed happened almost too quickly for me to properly track, Dane closing the distance rapidly, disabling the first guard through a swift, controlled strike before the man could raise any alarm, then immediately turning to address the second guard who had barely begun reacting to his companion's sudden collapse. Within moments, both guards lay incapacitated but breathing steadily, and Dane waved me forward, quickly checking the immediate area for any additional threats before guiding me toward the now unguarded service entrance. "We need to move fast," he said, working to override the entrance's security lock, using a combination of tools he had apparently acquired during our journey through the palace's maintenance systems. "Once they realize these guards are down, they'll flood this section with reinforcements." The lock finally yielded, and we slipped inside, finding ourselves within a narrow service corridor leading toward the tower's central control systems. Dane moved quickly but carefully, checking each junction before allowing us to proceed, until we finally reached a room containing the tower's primary broadcast controls. This should allow us to override any current transmissions and broadcast directly across the capital's communication network, I said, recognizing the equipment from technical briefings I had received but never expected to personally operate. "Can you handle the technical side?" Dane asked, positioning himself near the room's entrance to maintain watch for approaching threats. "Yes," I said, already moving toward the primary console, my hands working through security protocols with steady determination, despite the danger surrounding us. "I need only a few minutes to prepare the evidence for broadcast." As I worked, uploading the security logs and communication records proving Corin's involvement in tonight's betrayal, I became aware of raised voices approaching from somewhere within the tower's interior, clearly alerted to our presence. "Dane, we may not have much time," I said, urgency creeping into my voice as I continued preparing the broadcast. "Working on it," he said, moving to secure the room's entrance more thoroughly, positioning available furniture to create a temporary barrier against anyone attempting to force their way inside. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the distinct sound of multiple soldiers approaching with clear purpose. Dane readied his weapon, positioning himself between the entrance and my position at the console, prepared to hold this final line while I completed the task that might expose Corin's betrayal to the entire empire. "Almost ready," I said, my fingers moving quickly across the console's interface, compiling the evidence into a format suitable for immediate broadcast across every communication channel within the capital and beyond. The barrier Dane had constructed shuddered as soldiers attempted to force entry from the corridor beyond, and I understood we had only moments remaining before our position became untenable. "Finished," I said finally, activating the broadcast sequence just as the barrier gave way completely, revealing several rebel soldiers pouring into the room. Dane moved immediately, intercepting the first soldier before he could properly aim his weapon, using the confined space to his advantage in ways that prevented the attackers from bringing their numerical advantage fully to bear. I watched, torn between fear for his safety and the urgent need to ensure the broadcast completed successfully, as he fought with the same controlled efficiency he had demonstrated throughout the night, disabling one soldier after another while somehow avoiding serious injury to either himself or his opponents. A soldier near the back of the group, seeing his companions falling one by one, redirected his aim toward me instead, apparently recognizing that eliminating the Empress herself might prove more strategically valuable than continuing to engage Dane directly. "Thalira!" Dane shouted, already moving to intercept the threat, but the distance between us proved too great for him to reach me in time. Without thinking, driven by instinct rather than any formal training, I grabbed a nearby piece of broken equipment and threw it directly at the soldier's aim, disrupting his shot just enough that the energy bolt struck the console beside me rather than finding its intended target. The distraction gave Dane the crucial second he needed to close the remaining distance, disarming the final soldier before he could attempt another shot. Breathing heavily, Dane turned to check on me, his expression carrying genuine concern despite having just handled multiple armed opponents single-handedly. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," I said, still trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation. "Thanks to you, and perhaps thanks to finally learning to act rather than simply observe." He offered a brief, exhausted smile before glancing toward the console. "Did the broadcast complete?" I checked the display, relief flooding through me as confirmation appeared across the screen. "Yes," I said. "The evidence has been transmitted across every major communication channel within the capital and beyond. Every citizen, every loyal soldier, still listening, now knows the truth about Corin's betrayal." As if in response to my words, distant sounds began reaching us from outside the tower, shouts, the rumble of approaching vehicles, and eventually, the unmistakable sound of organized military forces arriving in significant numbers. "General Ashgrove," I said, moving toward a window overlooking the district below. She arrived exactly as promised. Below, loyal fleet soldiers moved swiftly through the government district, overwhelming Corin's forces who, having just heard undeniable evidence of their leader's betrayal broadcast across every channel, offered significantly less resistance than they might have otherwise, many surrendering immediately rather than continuing to fight for a cause exposed so thoroughly as fraudulent. Dane joined me at the window, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. "Looks like your empire is getting itself sorted out," he said. "Our empire," I corrected gently. "Tonight, you fought for this empire as much as any citizen born within its borders, perhaps more than most." He looked at me, something unreadable but warm passing across his expression. "Just doing my job," he said. "No," I said firmly. "You did far more than your job required. 11 guards, sworn through generations of tradition, abandoned their duty the moment convenience demanded it. You, owing me nothing beyond a simple service contract, stayed and fought through danger that would have terrified any reasonable person into fleeing. Within the hour, General Ashgrove herself arrived at the tower, confirming that Corin Vashel had been captured attempting to flee the capital, his plans thoroughly unraveled by the evidence we had broadcast. The Southern Fleet, upon learning the truth of their commander's manipulation, quickly returned their loyalty to the Empire's rightful leadership, and what had begun as a devastating coup collapsed within hours into a swift restoration of order. Standing once again within the palace, though this time in a temporary command center rather than the ruined throne room, I found myself reflecting on everything the night had taught me. My ceremonial guards, chosen through bloodlines considered impeccable by every traditional standard my empire valued, had proven utterly hollow the moment true danger arrived. Their oaths, carved into ancient law and reinforced through centuries of tradition, meant nothing when tested against genuine risk. Dane Ashford, a soldier from a species my empire had long dismissed as beneath proper consideration, had demonstrated exactly what genuine loyalty required: not empty ceremony, but consistent action rooted in personal integrity rather than legal obligation. Several days later, once the immediate crisis had been fully resolved and Corin's trial proceedings had begun, I called Dane to a private audience within my restored chambers. He arrived still wearing his simple gray uniform, looking somewhat uncomfortable within the palace's grand surroundings, clearly more accustomed to practical environments than ceremonial ones. "Your Highness," he said formally, though I noticed a slight smile at the corner of his mouth, likely remembering how casually we had spoken during our shared ordeal. "Please," I said. "Thlira is fine, especially in private conversation." He nodded, relaxing slightly. "What did you need to discuss?" "I have decided to establish a new position within my personal guard," I said, "Commander of Royal Protection, reporting directly to me, rather than through traditional ceremonial channels bound by ancient laws that clearly proved insufficient when genuinely tested." Dane's expression shifted with surprise. "That's a significant honor," he said carefully, "though I imagine plenty of nobles will object to a human holding such an important position." "They may object," I said, "but their objections carry considerably less weight following recent events. My empire needs to reconsider what genuine loyalty actually looks like, rather than continuing to value bloodlines and ceremony over character and consistent action." "And you believe I'm the right choice to demonstrate that lesson?" "I know you are," I said firmly. "You stayed when everyone else fled. You protected me through danger that should have overwhelmed any reasonable person's instinct for self-preservation. You demonstrated, through action rather than empty words, exactly what my empire's guards should have represented all along." Dane considered the offer seriously, and I could see him weighing the significant responsibility being presented against him. "I accept," he finally said, "though I should mention, if I'm taking this position, I intend to actually train the guard force properly, rather than relying on ceremonial forms that clearly failed tonight's test." "I would expect nothing less," I said, genuinely relieved by his acceptance. Perhaps it is time my empire learned that true strength comes not from ancient bloodlines or ceremonial oaths, but from the kind of character that chooses to stay when everything suggests fleeing would be easier. As Dane departed to begin organizing what would become a complete restructuring of my palace's security forces, I found myself standing alone within my restored chambers, reflecting on how thoroughly this single night had reshaped my understanding of leadership, loyalty, and the true measure of someone's worth. My ceremonial guards had called their abandonment lawful, citing ancient traditions that released them from duty the moment danger became real. I now understood that true loyalty required no such legal permission, no ceremonial justification, only the simple, unwavering choice to stand firm when everyone else chose to run. They called it desertion when my guards fled. I called it the moment I finally understood what genuine loyalty actually required, a lesson taught not through ancient scrolls or ceremonial oaths, but through the quiet, steady presence of a single human soldier who chose to stay when staying meant everything, and who proved through action that some promises, once made, remain unbreakable regardless of the cost required to keep them.